Hello. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Mike Fong is an experienced technology executive and entrepreneur, founding and growing network integrator Calent LLC, and a startup organization to a 300 million plus company with sales to prestigious corporate government clients all over the world. He has consulted and or served as a board member for companies across many industries, including chairing the Arizona Governor's Council on Innovation and Technology. He is a two-time Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalist and was named the Ed Dennison Business Leader of the Year for the state of Arizona. He has 15 plus years of venture capital experience as both an investor and strategic advisor. Today he will present a talk titled Privacy and Information Security, the Evolving Threat Vector of Proximity Data. Please welcome Mike Fong.
Thank you, Heather. Is it working, Steve? Can you hear me? No? All right, I've got an orange light. How about now? Oh, maybe that mic's working. How about now? Can you hear me? Check, test, test. We'll do a quick mic check here. Says green. Oh, are we good? Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction, Heather. I appreciate it. It's a big honor to be here. I'm excited to spend some time with you today. Before I get started, let me get a quick sense of who's in the audience. So how many people either work in the computer security field or have a technology background? Can you raise your hands? Oh, excellent. Okay. So we've got a technical audience. And then anybody from law enforcement or national security, if you're willing to raise your hand. Oh, there we go. Got my eye on you. All right. So it's always good to know. A lot of times some of those people, they don't give you a business card. They don't share their last name, and you never know exactly. All right. There you go. All right. Well, it's good to know. So the preview of my talk really, tell them what you're going to tell them is that as insecure as you think the electronic device world is, it's more. So things are very insecure. There's an extraordinary amount of data collection that's occurring, and this affects each and every one of us in a lot of ways of which you're probably unaware. And my argument is you really should care, and I'll try to make that case. So with that as a starting point, let's jump into it. So first, let's zoom out and provide some market perspective. So technology underpins everything in modern society, right? I think it's hard to argue about that. If you go to the Consumer Electronics Show today, whereas years ago it would be Sony and Nintendo and things that you typically would associate with the consumer technology industry, now it's Ford and GM and automotive companies and appliance companies, because technology is being embedded in everything. And the technology is allowing the collection of extraordinary amounts of data. And so the future that we're moving into, which a lot of the talks over the past couple days, is that really it's all about that data. And it's big data, it's machine learning and artificial intelligence and processing. And there's a lot of wonderful things that will come out of that, but there's a double-edged sword about what that data also enables to be done. A couple of macro sort of trends beneath that are that consumers seem to have an insatiable demand for new technology, whether it's Oculus Rift or whatever the case may be. Corporations have a huge demand for all of the consumer data that's being collected, and that won't end. And then governments have a desire for all of the data for valid reasons, national security or economic security. So it's important to understand these dynamics as we jump into the talk. The two big issues I mentioned already. One is the lack of security of the devices that provide all of these features and functions. And then the second thing is that there's actually a lack of privacy. So if you think about, it's all about protecting or controlling your personal or corporate or government information. That information can be accessed via insecure devices by bad actors, or it can be a legitimate data collection and people whom you're unaware of that they have access to your data, how they're using it, and how it affects you. So both of those things come together to affect all of us in terms of our personal information. So most people wouldn't argue about the consumer desire for new technology, but let's talk a little bit about the corporate and government data collection for a little bit. So on the corporate side, we could do an hour-long or a day-long talk on every one of these topics. So I'm going to just try to hit a couple of key points to anchor us in what's happening. So put aside for a second all of the information that Google and Facebook gather on all of us, and that's an extraordinary amount of information. Let me bookend sort of something that's been going on historically and one of the more cutting-edge types of data collection that's out there. So on the historical side and ongoing as well, it's data brokers. This is a $150 billion plus a year industry with over 4,000 companies, and they try to place labels on, I think there's over 700 on each and every one of us in this room and every person on the planet that they can, which they then sell to marketers, right? So that you can be put into categories. I've listed a couple of the more offensive categories, and not sure if you guys can read that in the back. So there are a bunch of bullet points throughout the presentation, so feel free to move up. But some of these are ones that you say, hey, wait a minute. I was unaware that that's being collected. And on top of that, one of the big issues with this that's a common theme about data collection is that none of us get a chance to review what the data says about us. So we don't get a chance to review what data brokers, what their database says about our activities, our behaviors, our labels, and yet those labels are being used to affect how much we pay for things and also a bunch of other categories as well. If you jump to one of the more cutting edge types of data collection, who's heard of cross-device tracking? Anybody? A couple of head nods. So the idea here is that it originated in people now have a multitude of different devices that they access the internet with, right? So it could be your computer at home and then your phone on the way to work. It could be your work computer while you're at work. And marketers said, I want to know if it's the same individual across all these different devices. So they've developed very sophisticated tracking technologies that have the ability to tell if it's you or your wife using the same shared tablet, right? So mathematically, how your heat map on the way you move, all these different types of things. And one of the new ones that the Federal Trade Commission came out with a warning about are these high-frequency audio beacons. And the example they gave is that your phone, your TV, your radio, your computer emits an audible beacon that you can't hear, but that your phone could hear or your tablet can hear if it's running the right software. And so you're going ahead searching for a medical condition on your computer. You have cookies blocked. You think you have a sort of anonymous type of filter there on your computer. You then drive to your pharmacy. Well, the fact that the computer was emitting a beacon that could be picked up by your phone allows them to know what you were browsing, and then they say location tracking allows us to see you went to the pharmacy, so we're going to apply a label that says maybe you have this particular medical condition, which they then sell to companies that want to market to people like that. So very, very creepy stuff. It's almost so hard to believe. We had our audio engineers try and find some of these audio beacons. So I don't know if you can see this. This is one of the mainstream video providers, streaming over-the-top video providers. And this is a frequency chart from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. The audible voice range is sort of 300 to 3 kilohertz, right? If you look way up here in the 15 to 17 kilohertz range, you see a couple of these sort of non-spurious spikes. And that's an example of an audio beacon that says, this is the show that you're watching. And so this stuff is going on. It's much less in the United States, thankfully. But you can find patents that Google has filed on this technology. There's a company called Silverpush that's doing it internationally. They were issued a warning. And the FTC said, basically, as long as you disclose to people that you're doing this, it should be fine. So now let me ask you, how many of you read the terms and conditions of the apps you install? Oh, one, two, all right. We are an outlier group in this room right now. Okay, so back to Facebook and Google. How many of you here who here pays $0 per month to Apple and Facebook? You got the rest of you like actually paying? No, okay. So free services, right? What do you think their combined market cap was on Friday of last week? Almost $900 billion combined. So do you think that this data collection by corporations is going to end by itself? Probably not. The value of our personal data and the monetization of it, it's so compelling. And that's why you see this thing continue to happen. The other piece on the corporate data collection side, let's talk about where it's headed. So personal digital assistants. Again, phenomenal. We're all going to be excited about this. We're all going to want to use it. It's much more natural to interact with electronic devices with our voice than with our thumbs or fingers, right? But the issue with that, of course, is that everything we say will be recorded. And here we talk about by 2020, we'll all have an invisible friend. So, and the idea is that these digital assistants will anticipate your intent by what you say. Talking about visiting your family, it'll look for plane flights, right? Talking about meeting with someone, it'll try and schedule something in your calendar. Now, the chart I show here is just to give you a sense. There are over 100 companies working on these technologies. And just today, in one of the earlier sessions, I was just before we broke, I started checking the news for today. 3 announcements. Today, Google announced Google Home to compete with Amazon Alexa. Ford announced Alexa is going to be embedded in multiple cars. And Gartner said that by 2020, digital assistants will be a $2 billion a year industry. That's just today. I mean, you can't even keep up with this stuff. This is happening. And if you think about it, why is Google so valuable? Because they dominated search. What happens when you never type into a search engine again? When you're just talking to your device? Whoever wins the digital assistant game has a chance to take over that marketplace, right? So this is something you need to be aware of that's happening. It's essentially inevitable if it turns out that the technology improves the way it has over the last 4 years. Okay, let's flip over to government data collection, and let's again leave aside, the mass data collection, every web search, every piece of internet traffic, every phone call, every text message, and let's talk about something that underlies a lot of the sort of the substrate of internet traffic and communication, and that is encryption. And there was a debate here yesterday. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend, so maybe some of you were here for the debate about should there be backdoors in encryption. But again, let me bookend. In an authoritarian state like Russia, maybe we'd expect this. They just passed one of the most stringent data access laws in the world. And there's a lot of other things associated with that. Full access to all communication and encrypted data. On perhaps a more Western or liberal countries like the European Union, again, this is from just last month, France and Germany actually pushed for the entire EU to have legislation that mandates access to encrypted communication. And it's an understandable reaction given the horrible events that have occurred, right? It's for security. Now, the challenge with this, and by the way, you can look at Japan, Great Britain, Canada. I mean, across the world, governments are looking at whether this should be mandated. The issue is if you go ahead and put a single back door into all of this communication, you run the risk that that back door can be accessed by everybody, right? And there's a great example, again, right, hot off the presses. The hardest part about this presentation for me is keeping it current. It can be changed every week with the news that is out there, right? So, Microsoft lost their golden key that handles a key element of their protection. And if people can get to the back doors, all financial transactions, secure communications are at risk, right? And so that's the real trade-off that needs to be explored and has to be wrestled with and debated. In the United States, of course, after the San Bernardino attacks, there's been legislation discussed in Congress. There's been talks about forming commissions to look at this issue. Right now, it doesn't seem to be moving forward. But what I pull here is President Obama's keynote speech at South by Southwest earlier this year. And what caught my eye was not his comment about private citizens' smartphones should be accessible to the government, but the reasons for which it should be accessible. And he talked not just about terrorist attacks, but he talked about things like tax enforcement. So he leapfrogged violent crime, robbery, things like that. And so that's like, well, wait a minute. If this access is provided, where does society draw the line about when things can be accessed and for what purpose, right? Dawn versus doom. And then the last thing here, again, if you pay attention to some of these news and track these topics, this is a quote from the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, in open testimony in front of Congress earlier this year, talking about the Internet of Things. And he talked about the fact that, the golden age of surveillance, not only will we be able to use the Internet of Things to surveil on people inside their homes, but we'll be able to use it for recruiting. We'll be able to use it to find credentials that they can leverage to break into other networks and so on and so forth. So this is sort of the environment of things that we need to be aware of. All right, wrapping it up here on the data collection side, I just like this particular article and really just take a look at the quote at the bottom. We're moving into a world where everyday devices will capture your every utterance and action. So, the dawn or doom scenario is, how do we as a society find that balance between getting the benefits of all this technology and balancing the potential downsides? All right, so quick before preface for these next set of comments, I'm going to shift from data collection to sort of my view on the state of the security world. And so I was an electrical engineer from Carnegie Mellon, and excuse me, at my prior company, one of the focus areas was security. So we did a lot of security architecture design, implementation, all the way through outsourcing. We did penetration testing and other things like that. So these inform my view that I'm going to share with you about the state of the security market. And I know a lot of you work in this field. So if you're a chief information security officer right now, this is the type of environment that you have to deal with. And again, almost every one of these bullet points could be a talk, so I'm just going to operate at the high level to give you a sense of what's happening. On the people side of the house, the teams are overwhelmed. There's literally too much for them to do, and the technology is moving so fast. There's a ton of challenges there, and there are massive, as an industry, shortages of both people and skills. The latest projection I saw is that within the next several years, there's expected to be 1.5 million security jobs unfilled, right? So, for the students in here, not a bad opportunity, right? Jumping through, you have not to worry about outside attackers, you have to worry about inside attackers, and then you're also fighting against opponents who are bigger, stronger, more sophisticated, better funded than you. So Michael Rogers, the current head of the NSA, came out and said that pretty much every nation in the world other than Five Eye countries, so US, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, spy for economic benefit, right? Because economic security underpins national security. And what that means is if you're a CISO at a corporation that has anything of economic import to another country, you are facing attackers who are probably better funded, deeper resourced, with great skill sets attacking you. And so that's another thing you have to wrestle with. If you jump into the technology side, it's enormously complex, which I'll talk about in a moment. You have a lot of legacy systems that are no longer supported, but the companies struggle to uplift and sort of forklift replace. They're trying to put budget in other areas. Patch management is a huge issue. Hewlett-Packard talked about in 2015, they estimated that 44% of breaches were caused by security holes that had been known and patches were available for the prior 2 to 4 years. So that's one of the huge challenges that's occurring. Millions of indicators of threat, so you get overwhelmed by the data that's coming in. Social engineering is around to break through. Dwell time. Dwell time is how long has an attacker been in your infrastructure before you detect it, right? And the average stats are somewhere around 190 to 200 days right now. And then remediation is about 60 days. So, and this is just for the ones they catch. So they're saying, oh, you know what, Franco, we found a guy, they've broken into your network. You start doing all the forensics, they've been in there for 6 months. So that's pretty scary as well. And you're only as good as your weakest link. You can build the strongest front door, the back door's open, you're in trouble. And then CISOs also have to deal with a more complex business environment. Because of all of the press about the breaches and the break-ins, there's more regulatory requirements. Some of those are helpful, some of those maybe not as much, right? They add a lot of overhead and work. You have to worry about your supply chain. Again, more stuff outside of your direct control. Target was hacked because one of their suppliers on the HVAC side of the house got attacked, and that was used to infect the point of sale systems there. And of course, you have bigger brand risks, and business friction is a big one. They joke about security departments are the no department or the sales prophylactic. So you have this inherent tension between sales, marketing, and security, trying to say we need to get products out to succeed in the marketplace. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a few minutes. So a little comment here from Assistant U.S. Attorney General, pretty recent. You can't build a wall high enough, deep enough to keep people out. But don't believe him. Don't believe me. Take a look at this upper right statistic. 72% of security professionals surveyed 2 months ago at the Black Hat Global Security Conference in Las Vegas said that they are likely to suffer a major data breach within the next 12 months. Think about that. That is a staggering statistic. These are people whose full-time job and profession is to basically protect infrastructure and networks, and they're admitting, holy smokes, this is really hard. And you say, why is that, Mike? Well, there's a bunch of different reasons. One, there are attack vectors, methods of attacking that there's really for which there's no defense. There's 0 days in software, which by definition mean that the exploit is discovered at the time when you know the hack's occurred, so you have had no time to patch it. There are firmware exploits that are in there for which there's no defense. And of course, you also, it was reported several years ago that the sophisticated intelligence agencies will actually intercept packages in shipment, servers, firewalls, routers, mobile phones, and they will replace boards and chips before it ever gets to you. So you think you're opening a new package, and you're actually owned from the moment you power up the device. I'm going to do just a quick context around one vertical category, cell phones. So cell phones, if you look at it, they also are very vulnerable. The thing I'll highlight to you is in the middle here on the left, who heard of the Pegasus attack about 3 weeks ago? Anybody? Very sort of got a lot of publicity. So in essence, it was a 0-day attack on Apple iPhones that allowed them to get full remote control of the iPhone. Cameras, mics, contacts, every single thing, undetectable, and it actually went back all the way to the iPhone 5. So for as long as the iPhone 5 has been around, so how many years, they could get into any iPhone and take full remote control of it. And the thing that's interesting about that, there's been other examples of how people have been able to do that at iPhones, is it talked about there are dozens of companies that develop this type of software. The one that did this is a privately owned, actually it's private equity owned Israeli company. And generally in the industry, it's accepted that the Israelis are very sophisticated, but the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, and others are at least as sophisticated, and not even just the commercial companies, but the government agencies as well. So it gives you a sense about how big of an issue this really is. There was a rumor for a little while. Actually, for a long time, people felt Apple was secure, but I think the key message is that they've grown and grown. They become more in the crosshairs and the target. So, all right. So let's wrap up on the security topic a little bit by talking about why this is such a challenge. Why do people feel like they can't keep people out? So this is going to give you a sense of the complexity of the problem. If you look across the top here, you may not be able to read this. This is devices within the technology ecosystem. So everything from cell phones, tablets, laptops, network devices, all the way through the IoT. That is a $3.7 trillion ecosystem, $3.7 trillion per year, and growing. And this is, by the way, obviously an oversimplification of that, but I wanted to give people a sense of the breadth. If you look at the rows, this is sort of the technology stack. And the way to think about the technology stack is that whoever is lower in the stack wins. So apps lose to operating system system loses to firmware boot prom, those lose to chips. And here I break out chips into sort of core processor storage and have communications layer separately, so all the different forms of communication. So if you look at this matrix then, every single block or cell is an area that can be attacked to create a vulnerability. And if you're playing defense, the attacker only needs to get through once. And every single one of these cells, for as simplistic as it is in this one slide, could be a several $100 billion industry. Just take the cell phone one. There's over 10 million applications on just the Apple Store. What about Google Play? What about enterprise software like SAP? What about office automation software? Every single one of those is an attack vector. So you can get chickenpox really fast, right? So for the students, fun project, take the biggest hacks and start to map them onto this matrix. So I did that. But just for a few. So people are familiar typically with the higher level attacks, but if you remember the concept about lower in the stack wins, what I wanted to share with you are some very high profile lower in the stack attacks that demonstrate if you win there, you win everywhere else. So there was a report that the top 10 hard drive manufacturers had their firmware compromised. So that even if you wipe the hard drive and reinstall the operating system, you could not get rid of the malware, and you're totally owned. You literally have to throw the device away. This is the hard drives, okay? So no way you can stop that. University of Michigan came out, a month or two ago, analog malicious hardware. It was a way to put in a backdoor at the chip level after the chip's been designed and when it was in testing, adding a simple analog gate that allowed them to with a very complex sequence of commands that couldn't be caught in a normal chip testing process, flip the privilege bit on the processor. I see some head nods, so some people are familiar with that research. You can look it up, right? And again, who cares how good your app security is, how good your operating security is, how hardened it is, your firmware, you're owned at the chip level before it even goes anywhere. Qualcomm, it was sort of a story published about some issues with their Snapdragon processor and ways to sort of get through their secure enclave and things of that nature, I believe. That's in many, many millions of devices. Cisco and Juniper, backdoors, holes in their firewalls, the recent NSA toolbox that got hacked or released, 980,000 Cisco devices that were vulnerable to that. And by the way, that's the first line of defense. Malware shipping in chips. So Xiaomi and Lenovo and a bunch of other manufacturers, not enough room on the slide to put this, but again, at the base level below any level of security you could normally provide. We talked about Target, Jeep and Tesla, lots of different ways that those devices were hacked. I'm starting to move into the Internet of Things. And then just, again, in the last several weeks, Krebs on security. It was like, for him, I think over a 600 gigabit per second sustained distributed denial of service attack. The same botnet went over a terabit per second. And the underlying botnet that did that attack were IoT devices, internet-connected cameras, DVRs, and things like that. So the cyber criminals are understanding that, hey, Internet of Things, for which there's 20 million devices growing to 40 million, growing to an obscene number, embedded systems, very easy to attack and turn them into tools for sort of malicious purpose. So it gives you sort of a craziness about this. And the last slide, because Jerry's shaking his head, because I'm a little bit more on the doom side right now, if you can't tell, is this is my lifetime employment slide for security professionals. So take what I just shared with you and then realize that at any snapshot in time, it's a staggering, staggeringly complex problem and issue. But now realize that the rows across the top keep expanding, right? So more and more devices get added. Innovation is always occurring. There's new gaming consoles. There's new, whatever, Oculus Rift, there's VR, you name it. There's more stuff being added. And then every row keeps growing as well. There's always new software releases, new operating systems, new apps, and every one of those can be growing. So you have this explosion, both horizontally and vertically over time. And then to make it worse, you have an issue where defenses that used to work, like you think, oh, I've solved the problem, you advance in time a little bit, and that solution doesn't work anymore. So antivirus doesn't work because now you have polymorphic viruses, right? They can avoid sort of signature detection. You have issues where the most sophisticated cyber criminal gangs are able to look at the toolkit of defenders and buy the most sophisticated threat analytics engines, and they use them for quality assurance. So they say, oh, I'm going to write malware until it can't be detected by the most greatest stuff, and then I'll release it, right? And then to make matters worse, you have, as the New York Times reported, this business friction I alluded to. So Yahoo, was announced, 500 million accounts. I think yesterday, today, they're talking about 3 billion accounts. It keeps growing. This is an evolving story, again, day to day. One of the concerns that was reported was they said the inconvenience of added protection will prevent people from using our products. So realize how competitive every cell in that matrix is. And if you're the CEO of a company or a development team of a company in this ecosystem, you either are the market leader worried about losing share, or you're sort of competing, trying to gain share, and it can mean the difference between survival. All of your jobs, you compete on speed, you compete on innovation, you compete, the time to market. So there's this constant decision of, do I spend more time and money trying to make my products more secure, or do I release them and try to be successful and patch them afterwards? Guess which one typically wins, right? So lifetime employment, right? This problem is not going away. So, all right. And one other perspective on the business side, because I'm trying to make my case here, validation of the complexity. Look at how many companies are in the cybersecurity world. There's over 1,500 companies and growing, and this industry has been around for 20 plus years. The natural thing that occurs with more mature industries is consolidation. Why isn't consolidation occurring? Because every single one of those cells is a valid attack area. So some startup company says, here's a valid problem. We've developed a solution for it. Someone says, yeah, that's a real problem. There's companies with that issue. We fund you. it goes out there, and this target keeps moving, right? So this is why there hasn't been that much consolidation in the security industry, and it's sort of further validation of the nature and size of the problem. Okay, so, and I get carried away with this, so I got to check my time because otherwise we'll talk about security too much. I want to get to the privacy pieces, all right? So what's at risk? If things are insecure and there's tons of data collection, the typical way you think about it is data at rest and data in motion, right? So here's data on your devices, here's stuff going between them, your conversations, your text messages, your web traffic. Best practice, encrypt both of those, fence them, monitor the fenced area, and then remediate as quickly as possible when you see the intruder. The problem is the area around which you can fence is disappearing, and BYOD, bring your own device, and then of course things are moving to the cloud. And then there's this new category of data called proximity data. This is information created in the presence of an electronic device. What you say, what you see, where you go, whom you meet, what you do. It's enabled by all of the sensors that are embedded in cell phones, IoT devices. This used to just be the domain of intelligence agencies. Now it's able to be accessed by cyber criminals, everybody else, because we carry cell phones, right? The ubiquity of mobile devices. And it allows extraordinary profiling of individuals. Because if I can not just watch what you do on the internet and look at your traffic, but I can hear what you say to your spouse in your home, or when you're opening my package, or when you're in the store, you really can get some great insight. Now, of course, it's all going to be anonymized, so if that information is collected, don't worry. And of course, security-focused groups don't even let mobile devices in the building. A bunch of examples here. The only one I'd pop out in the interest of time is this Carnegie Mellon study that talked about how frequently the apps, over 50% of the most common apps track your location and share it. And then this comment in the bottom that they talk about, that's being shared with insurance companies, so it can be used for underwriting to set premiums and rates. This affects everybody. So you also have the one I'll highlight is this Uber. This is a couple years ago, but they had this God view. And then they collect all this data, and then the data scientists said, well, let's look and see who's having one-night stands or visiting prostitutes. So they called them rides of glory. So some marketing guy must have come up with that one. And if you notice, there's less on Valentine's Day and more on tax day. So again, sort of the creepy side of the location tracking and the data collection. This one just a couple weeks ago. So remember when I told you about these high-frequency beacons weren't in the United States that much yet? Golden State Warriors, this is a lawsuit that was filed that says, hey, the app is listening all the time and they're using high-frequency beacons. So we'll see where this plays out in the courts, and maybe there'll be more discovery and stuff will be revealed about that. There's all kinds of crazy stuff happening on stalking and the web and so on and so forth. Corporate and government, I think, this is a pretty well-known issue. I like the $160 billion a year from Western companies. The EU Parliament just came out, I think it was 260 to 340 billion euros per year in terms of cost. I love this quote from the former head of both the CIA and NSA, Michael Hayden. We're in the middle of the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. So that's sort of what we're facing in the cyber environment from a doom perspective. This is real. So it's not just me up here telling you this. This is real and it's serious. On the left, this is Operation Pawn Storm. They're called an advanced persistent threat. They've been known to target all kinds of different entities. And the most recent research talks about they're now targeting spouses and other folks like that because don't have the same level of hardened defenses, right? So it's also very serious. If you look at the upper right, alien spy, if you follow the news, you may have heard about the Argentinian prosecutor who's going to testify against the president in a corruption case. And he mysteriously committed suicide the night before he was supposed to testify. And then they found this spyware on his phone that allows him to turn on the mics, cameras, listen to him. That software is available on the dark web for, I can't remember, like 20 or 40 bucks. You can buy a subscription to be able to hack people. So, this is real stuff. This is drop dead serious, and it's really something for people to be aware of. Okay, so Jerry wanted me to show you this. Let me see if I can escape out. So we said, wow, this is crazy. We're going to go ahead and try and prove this ourselves. So we went and hacked our own iPhone, which is legal. we owned it, right? So publicly available code, and we had not a hacker, but our mobile app developer take that code, and within 2 days, he was able to hack our, I think it was like a 9.2 something iOS operating system, an iPhone 6, basically hack the phone and get full control of it. And you cannot tell. So the phone looks like it's turned off while it's doing things I'll tell you about. If you go into settings, nothing shows up under location tracking or under camera or mic access. And if you hard reboot the phone, it reloads itself, right? And what it does is it takes pictures every 5 seconds. And one of our sales guys was willing to carry this, brave man that he is. So you can see it takes pictures every 5 seconds. We can make it do it off the front or rear camera. He was driving around. It puts you on Google Maps so you can sort of see where he's driving. And for good measure, we said, let's calculate how fast he's driving. And then perhaps the most creepy.
Okay, candidate Sanders, what would have to address in a general election?
It records continuously, okay? So what that allows you to do, so now you combine what I shared, the insecurity of devices with the data collection and proximity data. Imagine what you can do with this. So you can sit there and say, hey, so-and-so, you went to your doctor, let's see if we could listen in the diagnosis. Oh, you stayed somewhere overnight that you don't normally stay. Let's see if we can get a picture of who you're with. You on a corporate setting, you went to a board meeting, or you went to your R&D facilities, or you had a big customer meeting. We know that's a competitive bid process. The ability to know where people are and get contextual meaning on that, and then to be able to listen, watch, and do things like that is extraordinary, right? So that's sort of the world that we're moving into as sensors are everywhere, and you run into these compromise issues. So let me wrap up, and then we can get to Q&A. So talked about the future is all about data. Technology underpins everything in modern society, which of course enables all kinds of data collection. Talked about sort of the people who are gathering the data and the incentives and the reasons why and why it's not going to end. Gave you some examples of that data collection and sort of my perhaps pessimistic, I'd argue pragmatic and realistic view on the state of security. And then we talked about proximity data and gave you examples of what it is, how it can be used and compromised, right? So the conclusion and recommendations on the security side of the house, this is sort of the what you can think about, right? One, you can keep raising the wall. So make it harder, make it cost more, and respond more quickly. And by the way, all of these recommendations can apply to us as individuals as well as to corporations at a broad sort of abstracted paintbrush level. The next thing is assume that the bad guys get in, right? That gives you a realistic thing to say, what would I do if I knew people could get access to my data if they really wanted to? Because that allows you to sort of think and prepare for it versus head in the sand, oh, they'll never get in, and then you're really exposed when they do. So anybody who tells you that's not true, I'd tell you don't believe them, right? And then what you really want to do is reduce the value and reward of breaking in. So because of that, encryption is your best friend. Encrypting data at rest, encrypting data in motion, locking down your proximity data, and then basically taking the sort of threat analysis to say, what is my most important or sensitive information? Who are the most important or sensitive people that I need to protect? And have a stratified approach to doing that. It's the same thing that governments do. The senior officials have a red phone, encrypted phone at their personal home. And you have to think about that for both the corporation as well as for you individually. Maybe it's your financial data or something else that you really want to make sure gets locked down. And then from there, you don't apply the same level of investment or effort to protect other types of data. And then to protect the corporation, you need to protect the consumer. That's why you need to be thinking if you work in the security field, because if you look at where things are headed, and of course if you're a consumer, you need to protect yourself, but the boundary between corporate IT devices and consumer IT devices is disappearing. So it's the smartphone, the tablet, all those sort of go across, the boundaries are gone. Internet of Things, you heard about how people are going to leverage that. The employees on your team, in your corporation are going to be having these IoT devices in their home. And if you're not thinking about helping secure those, you're going to have an access point into your network where you've spent lots of time and money trying to defend, right? So you need to think about that. Let's flip over to the privacy and data collection sort of points I'd share. The biggest question is, Why care? Why do I care that my data is being collected? And the common point is I've got nothing to hide, right? I think most of us will think that and say, yeah, this happens to other people, I got nothing to hide. So what I would argue is that you really should care because this impacts you way more than you think. And here are just a couple of examples. Kathy O'Neill, I believe, she wrote a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. She's a Harvard PhD in mathematics, worked in the hedge fund industry. And so she started looking into the big data algorithms that were occurring. And it's things like, hey, you're denied a job because of a personality test. You pay higher rates for loans or receive a longer prison sentence because of the data that's being collected about you. And we don't have time to go into all the ways that's being done, but it is being done. There's a whole book on it. And her point was really around the inequality that creates because, again, won't go into it. At the end of the day, this stuff is affecting us way more than we think with the data that's being collected. And again, back to my earlier point, it's a big issue because none of us gets to see what that data says about us. Civil liberties, of course, in the more authoritarian states. This one from Ukraine, people thought they had the anonymity of a crowd. They were protesting to try to get more freedom. And then they all got a text message on their phone that says, you've been registered as a participant in a mass disturbance. How chilling is that when you know that you could potentially now be dragged out of your home because of the fact that you were in that square, right? So this ability for these sensors to detect who's at protests, rallies, things like that is very sort of interesting. Healthcare organizations in the US, the Affordable Care Act is starting to say, hey, we should pay more for outcomes rather than procedures. So the unintended consequence of that is that healthcare organizations say, how do we influence outcomes? We need to look at other behaviors. So they started to buy all of the individual line item detail on your credit card data and your store loyalty card data to say, what is it that you're eating? And they started to develop, they said, we're going to do interventions. So if you buy cigarettes within 6 weeks after having surgery, we're going to call you and say, you know what, that can affect your recovery. If you start buying a lot of high processed foods, it could influence, make you pre-diabetic. That's a huge cost to the system. If you become diabetic, that's an intervention. But more importantly, those are the only two at the time when I read about this that they were doing interventions for. Everybody else gets a risk score. So you may have a risk score, you don't even know it based on what you're purchasing on your store loyalty cards and credit cards. They could, who knows how that'll affect you down the road. Auto insurance underwriting, and then this one is pretty crazy. Who's heard of dynamic pricing? A couple people? You can basically get charged more based on your zip code. You're from an affluent area. We're going to charge you more. I just noticed you're browsing and shopping on an Apple device. Well, the Apple users tend to be more affluent, so therefore we're going to charge you more. So can you imagine over the course of your lifetime, if you were not aware that this is going on, how much more might you pay that you did not know based on factors like this and data collection like this? And then it's really the tip of the iceberg. So this came out, Federal Trade Commission report, and I had to cut this back so it fit, right? There's more than this. The sensors in smartphones in 2015 allowed you to do things like personality types, stress levels, demographics, sleep patterns, smoking, levels of exercise, right? Smokers have specific algorithms that go for smoke breaks, so you can detect that. Crazy stuff which is possible through these types of sensors. And could those be misused at some point? Maybe. So again, the big issue with all this data collection, opaque, scalable, and potentially unfair. That's from Kathy O'Neill. So last slide, let me wrap up. Why care? I'll leave you with quotes from 3 people that are pretty high profile on this topic. So President Obama talks about one of the great paradoxes of our time, this technology which is going to enable so many things, the dual use, it's that dawn or doom type of issue that we're facing. Apple CEO Tim Cook talks about how privacy actually is so important. One of the reasons that Apple, as a general point, took the stand that they took for people's privacy. And then I like Edward Snowden's point where he says, if you don't care about the right to privacy, that's like saying that because you have nothing to hide. That's like saying you don't care about freedom of speech because you have nothing to say. So, right? My point is, you think it doesn't affect you, but it is affecting you. So realize how insecure things are. Realize how insecure things are, realize how much data is being collected and the trend that is sort of growing and growing and growing, and be aware that this does affect each and every one of you personally. So dawn or doom? Questions? I tried to talk as fast as I can to get the information out. So Heather's waving the timer flag on me. Sure.
I recently read an article in Men's Fitness where if you're wearing a fitness tracker, that hackers can, through Bluetooth, find out what your ATM PIN code is because you're using that fitness tracker hand to punch in your ATM code. I was wondering if you had come across that in your private industry or if that was a research only.
So the question is, and I know we're going to try to use the microphone so that it can be recorded. The question is, found an article in Men's Fitness. Someone hacked into the Bluetooth connection to a fitness tracker. Through the movements, you could determine the PIN code, right? So I have not seen that particular story. Like literally, there are so many. If you dig into this, it is the creepiest thing you can ever imagine. But I've heard things like, biometrics. Oh, let's use fingerprints. Well, a high definition photo, people were able to recreate the fingerprint, 3D print it, and use it to break into a sensor. And the issue is, once your fingerprint's stolen, you'll never get it back. The OPM, Office of Personnel Management hack, 20 million plus people with security clearances, millions of fingerprints all stolen. So I'm not a big fan of the biometrics, right, in terms of security. Hadn't heard of that particular story. That's good. I'm going to use it. Thank you.
Well, like on your,
We should let the microphone come around just so that it can. I was given the rules of engagement.
sorry, I can talk loud though too. Basically, with what technology is capable of doing, even if you turn off your smartphone, and you don't have the location activated, can they still hear you, see your picture, and know your location?
So the answer to that is, so I'd break it into two pieces. If you've been hacked, then absolutely yes. It's all an illusion. You could even holding your phone and turning it off, it's a software thing that says you're turning it off, so that can be spoofed. The hack that I showed you, you can go into airplane mode. It doesn't stop anything. We still track you via GPS, put you on Google Maps, and there's no way to detect that someone has full access to all the sensors on your phone and all the data on it. Now, if you haven't been hacked and you say, okay, I've got legitimate apps, it really depends on the permissions and it depends on the operating system and the provider. Some are better than others. Some give you more or less granular controls. And you not only have to think through how you control those, which most people don't, but you also have to think about the terms and conditions, because sometimes you may allow the apps to do things that you think that you're not allowing them to do.
Another thing, when I go in and look at the apps that came on my phone because I got it used on eBay, is there any way, like a website to go to that tells you what apps you don't want to uninstall because your phone relies on them to work, and which have been added that you can uninstall just to clean it up?
So I don't know, put it to the crowdsource. I don't know if there is a site that does that. I think generally speaking, I'd err towards delete everything and until
that
it doesn't
work real good though. You take Google Play out and you lose a lot.
Yeah, so if it's a Google phone, yeah, then the Google apps you probably want to keep. But you can start by deleting everything and add things back in. The risk of the used phone is you don't know what else is on there, right?
Right. Now, do you think our society has gotten to the point where we will leave our phones at home at a certain point when we go some places and start paying with cash so we're not as easily tracked?
So I don't think so. I think that human beings are creatures of extraordinary sort of path of least resistance, no friction, everything else. I've given talks like this in multiple places. Everybody's like, holy crap, I can't believe it. This is freaking me out. And then they walk out and they're going to keep using the phones the same way. So as much as I try to say this is affecting you, until you really realize it's affecting you and there's a frictionless way to guard against it, I personally don't think that the vast majority of people will change behavior. Having said that, I'm trying to walk the walk. I try to use cash where I can, and then I actually start a company to try and develop technologies that help people sort of lock down the sensors, but still get all the benefits of their technology. But unfortunately, right now, it's sort of a very high-end product. We're not able to, the first gen, we can't get the price down to make it available for the mass market, but hopefully we will down the road.
Okay, so basically the older generations will start paying cash and leaving it at home, and anyone maybe 45 and younger will just say, I can't live without it, right?
So I actually don't think that's the case. We've done market research. We did like 1,000-person quantitative market research study, multiple cohorts, and there was actually a reverse correlation with age on people who were interested in the protective technology. But the issue is, again, back to it has to be frictionless. Young people actually are aware of this, and hey, this is an issue, but nobody's really willing to forego the convenience and the benefits of the technology, which is totally understandable. So the key is there has to be a very simple way to control this, and then I think you'll get mass adoption. Question in the back. Oh, sorry, you first, then question in the back. Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to know if at some point you believe that technology will essentially self-implode, because we've made so many strides from the 1950s to today. How far is it going to go?
So I don't believe it's going to self-implode. I think the biggest issue that you'll see is the fact that technology, like any technology, can be used for different purposes, and oftentimes the intended purpose gets sort of perverted for uses that we might not want. And that really is something that as a society is under our control, ideally in a democratic society from a policy perspective. But I think what happens is the pendulum has to swing pretty far before society says enough and swings it back. And I think right now we're swinging towards more the doom scenario than the dawn scenario. But hopefully it'll come back. Question in the back and then up front.
You were talking about the chipsets arriving and they're already compromised. Is that internal sabotage? Is that hacking? How's that happening?
Oh, so I'll repeat the question. You're asking about the chips arriving already compromised. Is that at the manufacturer hacking? So it happens in multiple ways, right? So intelligence agencies say, hey, what if I could just pervert the supply chain? That's a pretty easy thing to do. So one of the revelations was, I think it was GCHQ and the NSA hacked into Gemalto, which is the Norwegian company, and they stole the encryption keys for the SIM cards for 450 some carriers around the world, which means they can now listen into the encrypted conversations of all cell phones without even having to hack the phones, right? So that was a sort of supply chain compromise of the SIM cards that go into the phones. Then you have the packages. So the short answer is multiple ways, in fact, all ways. That was one example. Another example is the University of Michigan report where backdoors get embedded in the chips during fabrication or during testing. And then you have things where, okay, I know I have a targeted attack. I'm trying to get into Franco's devices, so I just monitor when something's being shipped to him. I divert it. I open up the package, replace the boards and chips, repackage it, send it to him. And so, again, it's compromised from the moment you get it. So if you are a high-profile target, if you're a diplomat, if you're a politician, if you're the CEO of a large company, high-value targets like that have to be aware that they are being targeted. All right. So even at high-end hotels, there are stories about very specific targeted attacks at the high-end hotels around the world because they know that's where those people stay and that's where they get hacked. Other questions? Oh, sorry. Yeah, up front.
So I've noticed that people seem to make decisions about what's acceptable in terms of privacy based on kind of a visceral reaction to, my location is being tracked, or, there's a sensor, it's creepy, it's icky, it's yucky. And what I see is people making their decisions based on visceral reactions. I guess I'm just wondering, to what extent do you think that visceral reaction really is an accurate reflection of a privacy risk that could do real harm or kind of impart injustice? And are there cases that you can think of where maybe you have the visceral reaction and it's unfounded or not reflective of a real risk?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Is this a real risk? I think generally speaking, you say, well, does anybody care that I drove from here to here, right? Maybe not. But over a period of time, if your location is always being tracked, so insurance companies, there was an article that talked about if you drive more on city streets versus highways, you're more likely to get in an accident, so perhaps you can be charged more. If you're going for life insurance and you say, hey, I'm a low risk, and they can pull up your location data and say, I see you went to a skydiving place, a rock climbing gym, and a scuba diving gym, perhaps you might pay more. So I think what happens is, in any individual item, it's big deal, right? But it's when you start to amass all of this data and combine it in different ways, then it truly affects people. And the hard thing right now is that, my earlier point, there's no transparency about what the data that's been collected about you says, nor do you know how it's affecting you personally in terms of pricing from everything from internet, online shopping, to your insurance, to other types of things. And so what happens is people have a visceral reaction and they think, oh, this is obnoxious, but you can't function in modern society without your phone, right? So at some point, people just feel overwhelmed and they throw up their hands, and so there's no good options right now for people to get control. Even like trying to go into software and turn off location tracking while you're driving, it'll never happen, right? No one's gonna have the discipline to do that. And it's a great question. I don't know that I can fully answer it, but that's just some perspective on it. I think that there is validity to the visceral reaction, but it's very hard to quantify for most people. Most people won't sit in a conversation like this for an hour to understand the scale and the scope of what's happening and how it affects them. Jerry, any other comments or thoughts?
Well, Mike, it was as scary this time when I heard it as the first time I heard it. So thanks very much for your time indeed. It's been a great session. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.